Jonathan Miller was a man whose life told a story of patience, hard work, and the belief that persistence could overcome almost anything. He wasn't born into wealth, nor did he inherit vast lands or riches. What he did have was determination and the lessons his parents had quietly passed down to him during his childhood on a small piece of farmland in the rural South. When Jonathan was a boy, he would wake up before the sun rose, listening to the sound of roosters calling out in the distance. His father, though not a man of many words, always reminded him that farming wasn't just about planting seeds in the ground, it was about planting hope for the future. His mother, with her gentle smile, made sure he understood that every harvest carried more than crops. It carried dignity, self-reliance, and the chance to create something lasting. The early years were difficult. Their farm was small, and the profits barely covered the family's needs. Some seasons brought joy, when the fields were full and the market prices were fair. Other seasons brought hardship, with droughts or floods wiping out months of hard labor. But even in the hardest times, young Jonathan learned to keep going. He saw his parents rise before dawn and work until their bodies ached, never once talking about giving up. That quiet strength became a part of him. As he grew older, Jonathan's dreams grew larger. He wanted to do more than survive, he wanted to build something that could outlive him. Farming wasn't just work to him, it was his calling. While other children talked about leaving the countryside to chase different careers, Jonathan spoke about crops, soil, and machinery. He would spend hours in the library reading about agriculture, modern techniques, and global markets. He discovered that farming wasn't simply local anymore, food connected people across the world. When he was in his 20s, Jonathan took over more responsibilities on the farm. His parents trusted him to make decisions, and he began introducing new methods that increased production. He studied how irrigation could improve yields, how better seed choices could double the harvest, and how modern equipment could save time and labor. Slowly but surely, his small farm began to grow. But growth didn't happen overnight. It took years of sacrifice. Jonathan saved every extra dollar he made. He avoided unnecessary spending, fixed old machines with his own hands, and learned to do the work of 3 men when needed. He wasn't afraid of getting dirt under his fingernails, nor was he too proud to admit when he needed advice. His humility and work ethic drew the respect of other farmers in the community. Over time, Jonathan's efforts began to bear fruit not just in his fields, but in his finances. He expanded his land, bought better equipment, and even hired workers to help manage the growing demands of his business. He went from being a small farmer who barely made it through each season to a successful entrepreneur whose produce was in high demand. His crops didn't just feed his local community anymore, they were shipped to supermarkets and suppliers across state lines. By his 40s, Jonathan had turned his family's modest farm into a thriving agribusiness. He had warehouses, distribution networks, and even contracts with international buyers. For him, farming was no longer just about survival. It had become about leadership, vision, and creating opportunities for others. But even with all his success, Jonathan never forgot where he started. He still walked his fields early in the morning, touching the soil, checking the plants, and listening to the sounds of nature. He greeted his workers with kindness and respect, always remembering how it felt when no one believed in him. His story wasn't about sudden riches or shortcuts, it was about steady progress and the belief that no dream was too big. It was around this time that Jonathan began thinking about something most farmers never considered, owning a private jet. To many, that sounded like an extravagant dream, but to him, it was practical. His business was expanding quickly, and he needed to meet clients and partners in different states. He was receiving invitations to conferences, trade shows, and meetings with buyers overseas. Traveling by commercial airlines was tiring and often unreliable for his demanding schedule. A private jet, he thought, would not only save him time but would also allow him to reach new markets faster. At first, the idea felt almost unbelievable to him. A farmer owning a jet? It sounded like a fantasy, something far away from the life he grew up in. But as Jonathan reviewed his financial reports and future projections, he realized it wasn't just a dream, it was possible. His business earnings were more than enough to support such a purchase. One quiet evening, as he sat on the porch of his farmhouse, Jonathan thought about what this step meant. For him, the jet wasn't a symbol of luxury. It was a tool, a vehicle to push his work even further. He pictured himself flying to cities where he could negotiate new contracts face to face, cutting down the time he spent traveling, and making deals that could bring even more opportunities to his workers and his community. He knew that people might not understand. Some would call it unnecessary. Others might whisper that a farmer had no business thinking about planes. But Jonathan wasn't doing this to impress anyone. He was doing it because he believed in growth, in breaking barriers, and in showing that no dream was too far when you worked hard enough. In many ways, the thought of buying a jet carried more weight than just business convenience. It was proof that his journey had meaning. He thought of the young boy who once carried water buckets across dry fields, wondering if life would ever be easier. He thought of his parents, who had sacrificed so much without ever experiencing the kind of success their son was now living. He thought of the long nights when he worked alone, fixing broken machinery by lantern light, refusing to give up even when the odds were against him. Now, he stood on the edge of a dream that few people like him ever dared to imagine. The decision wasn't about pride, it was about proving to himself that he had made it, not only for his sake but for the generations that would follow. With a heart full of determination and hope, Jonathan made up his mind. He was going to buy the jet. The same way he had planted his first seeds in the soil with faith, he was ready to take this leap of faith into the skies. He didn't know what challenges might come next, but he had learned one thing in life: with courage and persistence, even the wildest dreams could take flight. After months of planning and preparation, Jonathan Miller felt ready to take the next step toward his dream of owning a private jet. He had researched different aircraft models, compared prices, and even spoken with financial advisors to ensure that the purchase would make sense for his business. He felt confident in his decision and excited about the possibilities. The idea of flying in a private jet to meet international clients, attend trade shows, and manage his growing agribusiness filled him with energy. He made an appointment with a well-known luxury aircraft dealership in a nearby city. As he drove toward the dealership, his mind was full of anticipation. He imagined walking into a sleek showroom, greeted by friendly staff, exploring the planes, and eventually making the purchase that would change his life. To Jonathan, this moment represented the culmination of years of hard work, dedication, and patience. When he arrived at the dealership, however, the atmosphere was different from what he had imagined. The building itself was impressive, with glass walls reflecting the morning sun and polished floors that gleamed as if they had never seen a speck of dust. The jets in the showroom were shiny, pristine, and intimidating in their size and design. Jonathan took a deep breath and reminded himself that he had earned the right to be there. He was not just a farmer, he was a successful businessman. He walked toward the reception desk, smiling politely. "Good morning," he said, introducing himself. "I have an appointment to see some aircraft models." The receptionist looked at him for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded and asked him to wait. A few minutes passed, and finally, a salesman appeared. At first, the man greeted him with a polite handshake, but as soon as Jonathan mentioned the models he was interested in, the salesman's expression changed. There was a flicker of surprise, a subtle raise of the eyebrows, and then a pause. "Those are high-end models," the salesman said, his tone slightly hesitant. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Jonathan paused, slightly taken aback. "Yes, I am," he said calmly. "I have the means and the intention to buy. I just want to see the planes and discuss my options." The salesman's smile returned, but it felt forced. He led Jonathan through the showroom, pointing out features of various aircraft, but there was an underlying tension in every word. He asked Jonathan repeatedly if he understood the costs involved, as if the idea of a farmer being able to purchase a jet was unbelievable. Other staff members whispered quietly to one another while pretending to check inventory. Jonathan noticed the reactions, but he refused to let them shake him. He had faced challenges before, and he knew that some people simply judged based on assumptions rather than facts. He reminded himself that he was not there to prove anything to anyone, he was there to make a business decision. Despite the awkwardness, Jonathan tried to stay positive. He admired the craftsmanship of the jets, noting how smooth the seats were and how advanced the control panels looked. He asked questions about maintenance, fuel efficiency, and storage, all with a careful eye toward making the best investment for his business. As they moved from one jet to another, however, the subtle skepticism grew more obvious. The salesman began making offhand comments that seemed designed to test him. "It's unusual for someone in agriculture to buy one of these," he said casually. "Most of our clients are established businessmen from finance or tech." Jonathan paused before responding. He could feel the weight of the comment, but he chose not to react with anger. Instead, he smiled slightly and replied, "I may come from agriculture, but my business operates on a national level. I deal with clients from all industries, and I need a jet to manage my operations efficiently." The salesman nodded, but there was a hint of disbelief in his eyes. Jonathan realized that no matter what he said, some people would always underestimate him because of his background. Yet, rather than letting this discourage him, he felt a quiet determination building inside. This moment was a test not of his financial ability, but of his patience and resolve. As the tour continued, Jonathan noticed other customers in the showroom staring at him. Some whispered to each other, glancing at his casual clothes compared to the more formal attire of other clients. He could feel the judgment, but he refused to let it distract him. Inwardly, he reminded himself that his worth was not measured by the opinions of strangers. Finally, they reached a model that Jonathan had been particularly interested in. It was sleek, modern, and capable of flying long distances without stopping. He ran his hand over the smooth exterior, imagining himself in the pilot's seat, navigating the skies with confidence. "This is the one I want to discuss," he said. The salesman hesitated. "It's a very expensive model. Most people only look at it if they're serious about the investment," he said slowly, as if he doubted Jonathan's seriousness. "I am serious," Jonathan replied firmly. "I have researched it thoroughly and prepared financially. I want to understand the process for acquiring it." The conversation shifted into discussions of technical specifications, payment plans, and delivery timelines. Jonathan asked precise questions about maintenance costs, fuel consumption, and customization options. Despite the salesman's initial doubts, it became clear that Jonathan knew what he was talking about. His confidence was calm but undeniable. Yet, the subtle skepticism lingered. Every time Jonathan mentioned his business or financial readiness, the salesman would pause, as if trying to reconcile the image of a farmer with the reality of a potential high-end client. Jonathan could sense the internal struggle, but he chose to stay focused on the facts rather than the assumptions. During a brief break, Jonathan sat in the lounge area of the dealership and looked around. The walls were decorated with photographs of past clients, some of whom were famous entrepreneurs and celebrities. He felt a twinge of unease, knowing that his name did not belong in that gallery yet. But he reminded himself that every journey begins with a single step, and he was already there, taking that step. The salesman returned and continued to explain features of the jet. Jonathan listened carefully, asking questions about avionics, cabin comfort, and safety measures. The more he asked, the more it became clear that he was not a casual buyer. His knowledge impressed even the skeptical staff, though they would not admit it openly. By the end of the visit, Jonathan had gathered all the information he needed. He thanked the salesman politely and left the showroom, feeling a mix of emotions. There was pride in knowing that he had navigated a situation full of subtle doubt and skepticism without losing his composure. At the same time, there was a lingering frustration at the way he had been judged before anyone truly knew him. On the drive home, Jonathan reflected on the experience. He realized that success is often accompanied by moments like these, moments where others' assumptions test one's confidence and determination. He understood that not everyone would recognize his achievements immediately, and that some would always be hesitant to see beyond stereotypes. But rather than letting this discourage him, Jonathan saw it as motivation. He knew that if he truly wanted the jet and the opportunities it represented, he would need to remain patient, persistent, and unwavering. He reminded himself of his parents' teachings: dignity and perseverance often matter more than recognition or approval from others. By the time he arrived back at the farm, the sun was setting, casting golden light over the fields he had nurtured for decades. Jonathan stepped out of his car, feeling the familiar cool breeze and listening to the distant sounds of livestock settling for the evening. Despite the subtle challenges he had faced earlier, he felt grounded. He was a man who had earned his place in the world through hard work, integrity, and vision. That night, as he sat in his study reviewing the notes he had taken at the dealership, Jonathan allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He had faced skepticism, doubt, and subtle prejudice, yet he had remained composed and focused. More importantly, he had a plan for how to move forward, and he was determined to see it through. Owning a jet was more than a business decision, it was a statement of confidence in his abilities, a testament to years of hard work, and a symbol of what persistence and vision could achieve. Jonathan knew the path ahead might have more obstacles, but he also knew that each challenge was an opportunity to prove to himself and to the world that he belonged wherever he chose to go. The day Jonathan Miller had been anticipating for months had finally arrived. After weeks of phone calls, emails, and careful planning, he had scheduled a return visit to the luxury aircraft dealership. This time, he intended to make serious progress toward purchasing the jet he had long dreamed about. He dressed in his usual business casual attire, wanting to appear confident but comfortable. As he drove toward the dealership, he reflected on his previous visit, recalling the skepticism and subtle doubts he had faced. He hoped today would be different. When he arrived, the building gleamed under the morning sun, just as it had before. The large glass walls reflected the bright sky, and the polished floors inside sparkled. Jonathan walked toward the reception desk with purpose, his head held high, ready to take control of the day. The receptionist greeted him politely and informed him that the salesman who had assisted him previously would be with him shortly. Jonathan smiled, nodded, and waited. Soon, the salesman appeared. At first, he greeted Jonathan with a polite handshake, as expected. But almost immediately, Jonathan noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The salesman's tone was unusually cautious, and his eyes seemed to measure Jonathan as if trying to determine whether he truly belonged in the showroom. The subtle skepticism from the first visit had not disappeared, it seemed to have grown stronger. "Good to see you again," the salesman said, forcing a smile. "Shall we take a closer look at the models you're interested in?" "Yes, please," Jonathan replied calmly. "I'd like to go over the options again and discuss the purchase process." As they walked through the showroom, Jonathan noticed more of the same subtle reactions he had experienced before. Staff members whispered quietly to one another while glancing in his direction. Other customers, some dressed in expensive suits, glanced at him with curiosity. Jonathan could feel the weight of their judgment, but he refused to let it disturb his focus. He reminded himself that he was there for business, not validation. When they reached one of the high-end jets, Jonathan asked detailed questions about its features, fuel capacity, seating arrangements, cockpit technology, and maintenance requirements. The salesman answered, but his tone carried a hint of doubt, as if he could not reconcile the image of a farmer with that of a serious jet buyer. "You know," the salesman said carefully, "these models are usually reserved for people in finance or tech industries. People who, have certain expectations. Jonathan stopped and looked at him directly. I am fully capable of purchasing this jet. My business operates on a national and international level. I need this jet for my work, not for appearances. The salesman paused, clearly taken aback by Jonathan's confidence. However, his tone quickly shifted back to a forced politeness. Of course. Let's continue. Jonathan could feel the tension in the room. It was subtle but unmistakable. Every question he asked, every step he took, seemed to be scrutinized more closely than anyone else. Some other customers began to whisper, their eyes occasionally darting toward him. Jonathan realized that his presence in the showroom was becoming more than a business matter. It had become a spectacle, something that drew attention and judgment from everyone around. He continued his tour, moving from jet to jet, asking questions and examining details. As he did, a new sense of frustration began to rise within him. He had worked his entire life to reach this point. He had built a successful business, saved and invested wisely, and meticulously planned this purchase. And yet, here he was, being judged based on assumptions and stereotypes rather than facts or accomplishments. The salesman, sensing the rising tension, made a sudden comment, speaking loudly enough for others to hear, "It's unusual for someone in agriculture to even consider one of these jets. Usually, we don't see farmers here." The words hit Jonathan like a cold gust of wind. He felt a deep sting of humiliation, not just for himself, but for all the effort, late nights, and sacrifices he had endured to get where he was. It was as if his years of hard work and success were being dismissed in a single sentence. Other customers in the showroom turned their heads, some whispering among themselves, adding to the public nature of the moment. For a moment, Jonathan felt the weight of every skeptical glance and every dismissive comment. But he quickly reminded himself that he could not control how others judged him, only how he responded. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and spoke calmly. "I may come from agriculture, but my accomplishments here are the result of years of hard work, smart decisions, and dedication. My ability to purchase this jet is based on merit, not assumptions." The room fell into a brief silence. The salesman looked momentarily unsure of how to respond, and a few of the other customers paused, realizing that Jonathan was not someone to be underestimated. Despite the initial humiliation, he felt a growing sense of empowerment. He refused to let someone else's doubt dictate his self-worth. As they continued discussing the technical details of the jet, Jonathan carefully documented every specification, noting features, pricing, and delivery timelines. He asked thoughtful questions, demonstrating that he was not just interested in a luxury purchase, but in making a strategic investment for his business. Each answer he received reinforced his belief that he was prepared, knowledgeable, and capable. Despite the underlying tension, Jonathan maintained his composure. He spoke politely but firmly, never allowing frustration or embarrassment to take over. In doing so, he sent a subtle but powerful message: he belonged here, and he would not be defined by anyone's narrow expectations. At one point, a well-dressed client nearby whispered to a companion, glancing toward Jonathan, "Can you believe a farmer is considering buying one of these?" Jonathan overheard the remark but chose not to react outwardly. Instead, he reminded himself that external opinions did not determine his value. He focused on the jet, on the details, and on the larger purpose behind his purchase. As the visit progressed, Jonathan's confidence began to shine through, even to the skeptical staff. The salesman, who had started the day with doubt, now found himself answering questions in a more detailed and careful manner. It was clear that Jonathan's knowledge and preparation had impressed him, even if he was reluctant to admit it openly. By the end of the visit, Jonathan had collected all the information he needed. He thanked the salesman politely and prepared to leave. Outside, the sun was bright, and the air felt crisp. As he walked to his car, he reflected on what had happened. The experience had been humiliating in many ways, but it had also reinforced an important lesson: dignity and composure mattered more than others' assumptions. He realized that success often brings moments like this, moments where others try to measure you by preconceived notions rather than facts. But these moments, Jonathan understood, were opportunities to demonstrate strength, patience, and self-respect. The way he handled them could set a powerful example for others who faced similar challenges. Back at the farm, Jonathan shared the experience with his family. They listened attentively, offering words of support and encouragement. His children looked at him with admiration, seeing not just a successful businessman, but a man who faced public skepticism with grace and resilience. That evening, as Jonathan sat in his study, he reflected on the day. He knew that the path forward would require not just financial readiness, but emotional strength and perseverance. The humiliation he had faced was real, but it would not define him. Instead, it became fuel for his determination to continue pursuing his dream. Owning a jet was more than a personal goal. It represented years of hard work, strategic thinking, and an unwavering belief in his own abilities. Jonathan understood that others might doubt him, judge him, or even try to humiliate him, but he also knew that he had the power to rise above it. Every challenge, every skeptical glance, and every whispered comment was an opportunity to show that persistence, preparation, and dignity could overcome prejudice and doubt. By the time the night settled over the farm, Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced public humiliation, yes, but he had faced it with calm, composure, and intelligence. The experience had reminded him of the value of patience and the importance of believing in oneself, no matter what others might think. And with that, he turned his thoughts back to the future, one where his dream of flying a private jet would become reality, not through luck or favoritism, but through merit, hard work, and unwavering determination. The day that began with doubt and subtle skepticism soon took a dramatic turn for Jonathan Miller. After the humiliating experience of being judged and questioned by the dealership staff, he returned to his office to review his notes, contracts, and financial documents. He was determined not to let anyone underestimate him or his abilities. While he had felt the sting of humiliation during his previous visit, Jonathan was now more determined than ever to assert himself with confidence and clarity. He carefully organized every document he had: bank statements, proof of assets, letters from financial advisors, and business contracts. Everything was in perfect order. Jonathan knew that the only way to overcome the subtle doubt lingering in the showroom would be to present irrefutable evidence of his readiness. He wanted to ensure that there would be no room for assumptions or hesitation. The following day, he returned to the dealership. This time, he brought his briefcase, not just filled with notes, but with documents that could leave no question about his financial capability. As he entered the showroom, he noticed the familiar gleam of the polished floors, the sunlight reflecting off the sleek jets, and the hushed whispers of staff who clearly remembered his previous visit. But Jonathan held his head high, walking in with the calm assurance of a man who knew his worth. The salesman who had greeted him with skepticism appeared once again. He extended a hand, this time with a slightly more cautious smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Miller. Are you ready to discuss the jet further?" "Yes," Jonathan replied firmly. "I would like to proceed today. I've brought all the necessary documentation to ensure a smooth process." The salesman gestured for him to follow and led him toward one of the high-end jets. As they approached, Jonathan noticed a few other customers watching him. The whispers and glances that had accompanied his previous visit were now more curious than judgmental. People seemed to sense that something unusual was happening. Jonathan opened his briefcase carefully and began to present his documents. He showed bank statements proving that he had sufficient funds for an outright purchase, along with letters from financial advisors confirming the legality and feasibility of the transaction. Contracts from his agribusiness demonstrated consistent income, expanding operations, and solid financial standing. Each page he presented was precise, professional, and undeniable. The room went silent. The same salesman who had doubted him earlier now found himself struggling to respond. He shuffled papers nervously and attempted to maintain his composure, but the evidence in Jonathan's hands was overwhelming. For the first time, the initial skepticism in the room began to dissolve. This is all accurate?" the salesman asked, still sounding incredulous. "Yes," Jonathan replied calmly. "Everything is in order. I am fully capable of purchasing the jet. My intention is to make this transaction today if possible." The silence in the showroom was palpable. Other customers looked on, some with surprise, others with admiration. It became clear that Jonathan's financial capability and preparation had shifted the dynamics entirely. Where once he had been underestimated, he now commanded respect not because of his words, but because of the undeniable proof he presented. Despite the sudden shift, Jonathan maintained a calm demeanor. He did not gloat, nor did he seek revenge for the earlier humiliation. His purpose was clear: to secure the jet for his business and to demonstrate that preparation, diligence, and integrity could overcome doubt. The salesman, now visibly flustered, quickly changed his approach. "Of course, Mr. Miller. I apologize if there was any misunderstanding previously. Let's go over the final steps for the purchase." Jonathan listened carefully as the salesman outlined payment procedures, delivery timelines, and customization options. He asked thoughtful questions, clarifying every detail to ensure there would be no errors or misunderstandings. As the conversation progressed, it became evident that the staff who had previously doubted him now treated him with the respect he had always deserved. Yet, even as the situation improved, Jonathan was aware of the deeper lesson unfolding. The initial skepticism he had faced was not just about the jet, it was about perception, assumptions, and the subtle barriers people place before others based on background or appearance. By presenting facts, preparation, and calm confidence, he had changed the narrative. He realized that success often requires not just resources, but the courage to confront bias and prove oneself through actions. As the dealership staff worked to finalize the purchase, other customers began to approach Jonathan with curiosity. Some asked questions about his business, wanting to understand how a farmer could achieve such success. Jonathan answered politely, sharing insights about agribusiness, strategic investments, and the importance of persistence. He noticed that their tone had shifted from doubt to genuine interest, a transformation that underscored the impact of preparation and poise. During the discussion, Jonathan also noticed a young employee observing him quietly. The young man seemed intrigued, possibly inspired by Jonathan's confidence and composure. Jonathan offered a small smile, realizing that his actions could influence others beyond the immediate transaction. In that moment, he understood that every experience, even one that begins with doubt or humiliation, can become a lesson for those who witness it. By the time the paperwork was complete, Jonathan had successfully secured the purchase of the jet. The staff, now fully respectful, congratulated him on the acquisition. He accepted their words graciously, knowing that his calm persistence and preparation had turned a potentially humiliating experience into a victory. As he walked toward the exit with the sales documents in hand, Jonathan felt a mix of relief, satisfaction, and quiet pride. The journey to this point had not been easy. He had faced skepticism, subtle judgment, and public humiliation, yet he had overcome each obstacle with dignity. This moment was a testament not only to his financial success but also to his character, patience, and unwavering belief in himself. Driving back to the farm, Jonathan reflected on the events of the day. He realized that while the jet was an important tool for his business, the experience of overcoming doubt and bias was equally significant. It reminded him that success is often about more than wealth. It is about resilience, integrity, and the ability to remain composed in the face of adversity. Upon arriving home, Jonathan shared the news with his family. Their excitement was palpable, and their pride in his achievement was clear. Yet, beyond the joy of the purchase, they discussed the lessons embedded in the experience, the importance of preparation, the value of patience, and the strength required to confront and overcome skepticism. That evening, Jonathan stood on the porch of his farmhouse, looking out over the fields that had been his life's work. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the land. He thought about the journey from a small family farm to owning a multi-million-dollar agribusiness and now a private jet. Each challenge he had faced, each skeptical glance, each moment of doubt, had contributed to his growth and resilience. In the quiet of the evening, he reflected on a simple truth: achievements are often measured not just by the goals themselves but by the obstacles overcome along the way. The jet represented more than convenience or luxury. It symbolized persistence, planning, and the courage to assert oneself despite doubt and prejudice. As night fell, Jonathan felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had not only purchased the jet but had done so in a way that reinforced his dignity and strength. The events of the day had been a turning point, transforming an experience of skepticism and doubt into a story of determination, preparation, and triumph. Looking forward, Jonathan knew that challenges would continue to arise, as they always do in business and in life. But he also knew that he had the tools, mindset, and resilience to face them. The shocking turn of events at the dealership was a powerful reminder that success is not merely about wealth, it is about character, perseverance, and the ability to rise above judgment with grace and confidence. After Jonathan Miller finalized the purchase of his private jet, he returned to his farm with a deep sense of accomplishment. The journey to this moment had been long and challenging, marked by years of hard work, perseverance, and countless obstacles. The jet was more than just a tool for business. It symbolized the fulfillment of dreams that had been nurtured since childhood, the tangible reward for a lifetime of dedication. As he stepped out of his car and walked toward his farmhouse, Jonathan reflected on the experiences he had faced during the process. The skepticism, doubt, and subtle humiliation he had encountered at the dealership had initially been discouraging, but they had ultimately strengthened his resolve. Each challenge had tested not only his patience but also his confidence and belief in himself. He realized that the moments of discomfort and judgment were, in their own way, opportunities for growth. The news of Jonathan's purchase quickly spread beyond the walls of the dealership. Local newspapers and online platforms shared his story, highlighting how a farmer had risen from humble beginnings to acquire a luxury private jet. Many were inspired by the tale, seeing it as a symbol of determination, resilience, and the power of hard work. The story resonated especially with young entrepreneurs and aspiring business owners, who saw in Jonathan a model of what could be achieved with vision and persistence. Jonathan himself was not interested in fame or recognition. He cared about the impact his success could have on others. He knew that his journey could encourage people to pursue their dreams without being limited by stereotypes or societal expectations. His experience at the dealership had reminded him that prejudice still exists in subtle forms, and that people often make assumptions based on appearances or background. Yet, it also demonstrated that preparation, knowledge, and self-assurance could overcome even the most persistent doubts. In the days that followed, Jonathan began using his jet for business purposes. He traveled to major cities to meet clients, negotiate contracts, and explore new opportunities for his agribusiness. The jet allowed him to move efficiently, cutting down travel time that had previously limited his reach. Meetings that once took days to coordinate were now possible within hours, and the jet became an invaluable tool for expanding his operations and connecting with partners across the country and beyond. Despite the convenience and efficiency, Jonathan never forgot the lessons he had learned along the way. Each time he boarded the jet, he remembered the skepticism he had faced and the calm, confident way he had navigated it. He reminded himself that success was not just measured by wealth or possessions, but by the ability to handle challenges with grace, integrity, and dignity. These were the qualities that defined him, far more than any external achievement ever could. Jonathan's story also had a ripple effect on the community around him. Local farmers and aspiring entrepreneurs began to see possibilities they had previously thought were out of reach. They approached Jonathan for advice, asking how he had managed to overcome obstacles, build a thriving business, and achieve such remarkable milestones. He welcomed these conversations, sharing practical guidance, lessons learned, and encouragement. He emphasized the importance of persistence, preparation, and maintaining one's dignity in the face of doubt or prejudice. One particular afternoon, Jonathan hosted a small group of young business owners at his farm. He gave them a tour of the fields, explaining the processes behind his successful agribusiness. He spoke candidly about the challenges he had faced, including financial struggles, difficult seasons, and the skepticism of others. Then, he shared the story of his experience at the aircraft dealership, recounting both the moments of doubt and the eventual triumph. The young entrepreneurs listened intently, inspired by the combination of humility, determination, and intelligence that had guided Jonathan's journey. Through these interactions, Jonathan realized that the most meaningful part of his success was not the jet itself, nor the wealth it represented, but the ability to inspire and uplift others. He understood that accomplishments gain deeper significance when they are used to encourage, educate, and empower others to pursue their own goals. His story became a living example of how barriers, whether financial, social, or perceptual, can be overcome with courage, preparation, and persistence. Meanwhile, the dealership that had doubted him faced its own reckoning. News of the staff's initial skepticism and subtle prejudice spread across social media and local news outlets. Many people expressed disappointment in how the situation had been handled, emphasizing that professionalism and respect should be extended to every client, regardless of background. The dealership eventually issued a public statement, acknowledging the experience and expressing regret for any offense caused. While this recognition did not undo the earlier humiliation, it reinforced the idea that integrity, fairness, and respect in business are essential, and that customers who demonstrate patience and perseverance deserve to be treated accordingly. For Jonathan, the experience strengthened his commitment to fairness and ethical practices within his own business. He reflected on how easily assumptions can affect judgments, and he resolved to create a culture of respect and inclusion in every aspect of his operations. From hiring practices to interactions with clients and suppliers, he made it a priority to ensure that every person was treated with dignity and given the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities. His experience at the dealership had shown him that talent, dedication, and potential are not always immediately visible, and he wanted to ensure that no one on his team would ever feel underestimated or undervalued. As the months passed, Jonathan's agribusiness continued to flourish. The jet allowed him to explore new markets, secure additional contracts, and strengthen relationships with partners around the world. He was able to provide more employment opportunities in his community and invest in sustainable farming practices that benefited both the environment and the local economy. Each flight, each new contract, and each expansion of his operations reminded him of the power of vision, perseverance, and resilience. Even with all the success, Jonathan remained humble. He continued to walk his fields, checking on crops, speaking with workers, and staying connected to the foundation of his business. He understood that achievements are meaningful only when grounded in hard work, integrity, and a sense of responsibility. The jet, while a remarkable symbol of success, was also a reminder of the journey he had taken, the long hours, the obstacles, and the moments when he had to trust in his own abilities even when others doubted him. One evening, as he sat on the porch overlooking the golden fields, Jonathan reflected on the full arc of his journey. From the small farm of his childhood, through years of sacrifice, to the acquisition of the jet and the growth of his business, he recognized a consistent theme: success is not simply about what you achieve, but about how you achieve it. He thought about the lessons learned through every challenge, including the moment of public humiliation at the dealership, and realized that those moments had shaped him as much as his victories. He also considered the importance of inspiring others. Jonathan understood that stories of perseverance, dignity, and strategic thinking have the power to motivate, uplift, and guide those who may be facing similar challenges. By sharing his experiences, he could help others navigate obstacles, confront doubt, and achieve their own dreams. His journey was a testament to the idea that barriers, whether real or perceived, can be overcome when met with preparation, confidence, and patience. In the quiet of the night, Jonathan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had not only achieved his dream of owning a jet, but he had also transformed an experience of skepticism and humiliation into a story of triumph and inspiration. The lessons were clear: perseverance matters, preparation is essential, and dignity is priceless. Success was sweeter when it carried the power to teach, uplift, and inspire. Looking ahead, Jonathan knew there would be more challenges, more doubts, and more moments that tested his resolve. But he was confident that with the principles he had embraced, hard work, humility, integrity, and patience, he could face any obstacle. The jet would continue to serve as a tool for his business, but more importantly, it symbolized the journey, the lessons learned, and the ability to rise above doubt with confidence and grace. Jonathan's story became more than a tale of financial success. It became a story of character, resilience, and the transformative power of believing in oneself. His experience showed that true achievement is measured not just by possessions, but by the integrity, perseverance, and inspiration that accompany it. And as he watched the sun rise over his fields each morning, he knew that the journey of learning, growing, and inspiring others would continue just as limitless as the skies through which his jet would soon fly.